All right, we are in Revelation chapter 16. We got down through verse 14, I believe, and touched on 16 and completely skipped over 15. So we're going to go back and kind of fill in the blanks there to get that part of it complete, and then we'll go on to verse 17 and following today. And and if time permits, also give a little more introduction to chapter 17. So we'll see how far we get. Right. So if you remember from last time in chapter 16, we're going through the 7 bowl judgments. We had gotten through the 6th bowl in verse 12 and following, when we had the bowl dumped on the river Euphrates, which dried up the river and allowed then the quote kings of the east to come across. Somebody may have an open mic. I may want to just check and make sure, because I'm getting a little feedback. Allowing the kings from the east to come over, and this is kind of setting up then the last and final battle, and that really takes us down to verse 16, where it is identified as the Battle of Armageddon. This is the battle actually in the plains of Megiddo, which is about 60 miles north of Jerusalem. It's a historical battlefield, if you will. A lot of battles have been fought on that plain. It's a big, wide plain. So it being identified as the place where this battle will take place is not surprising. The interesting thing here is that as I've said, we kind of should be jumping over to chapter 19 as we get into this battle, because that's where it occurs. But we do have this 7th plague, which comes up in verse 17, and part of the question is, when does the 7th plague occur? Does it occur before the battle? Does it occur before they all get together? Does it occur during the battle? And I think we won't know that until it happens. But certainly this 7th plague hits before Christ returns and takes over. So I think the two are kind of wrapped in together to some degree. But then we have this verse 15, which is kind of our interlude, as you remember, before every 7th event, before the 7th seal and the 7th trumpet, we've kind of had a little interlude. This is our very brief interlude here, verse 15, before the 7th bowl, where he kind of gives us a little bit of a break from the tribulations that are going on. So let me just read verse 15. It says, "Behold, I am coming as a thief. Blessed is he who watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame." So he gives this little blessing, again, right in the middle of all of this tribulation that's going on. And he says, "Behold, I'm coming as a thief." You certainly remember this picture from other places in Scripture. In 2 Peter, it talks about him coming as a thief in the night. Right? That's not unusual. I did want to show you another place, though, in Matthew chapter 24, Matthew 24:27. By the way, if you wanted that verse in 2 Peter 3:10, where it talks about him coming as a thief. But here I'm looking at Matthew 24, verse 27. Mine says, "For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be." So again, you got this idea of him coming as a thief, coming quickly, coming suddenly. Suddenly may be the best word. And we've looked at it before in the Revelation chapter 22. He says 3 different times, "Behold, I'm coming quickly, I'm coming quickly, I'm coming quickly." In chapter 22, and really the picture there is of suddenly more than it's going to happen next week. When he comes, it's going to be something shocking and surprising and sudden. I think the same pictures here. He comes as a thief. He comes unexpectedly. And then we have this little beatitude there. It says, "Blessed is he who watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame." So you have this, we have this beatitude, which is really a blessing and asking for us to be ready, right? Blessed is he who watches. Blessed is he who's ready. Blessed is he who keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and see his shame. So, the keeping his garments, it's kind of like, a soldier being on duty, being ready for the battle, right? He's just been talking about the battle. You could go back to the armor of God, as we've, you could pick up those verses to talk about being ready. But again, it's this idea of not being ashamed is connected to it. If you go back to 1 John, just go back a couple of pages to 1 John, chapter 2. Chapter 2, verse 28. We have a similar statement in 1 John 2:28. It says, "And now, little children, abide in him, that when he appears, we may have confidence and not be ashamed before him at his coming." I think that's exactly the same statement we have here in Revelation. It's just different words, right? Abide in him so that you will have confidence. Stay connected to him. Be ready, so that when he comes, you will not be ashamed. You'll not be ashamed of backsliding. You'll not be ashamed of not being abiding in him. You'll not be ashamed of not being pure when he comes. And as it in back in Revelation 16:15 again, right? So keep on your garments. Be ready, lest he walk naked and they see a shame. In other words, you're embarrassed by what you're doing and by what your lack of purity. If you remember back to Revelation chapter 3, verse 18, when he addresses the Laodicean, there it is. I knew there was a word. When he addresses the Laodicean church, I can't say it quickly. In verse 18, is that right? Yeah. It says, "I counsel you to buy from me gold refined with fire, that you may be rich, and white garments, that you may be clothed, that the shame of your nakedness may not be revealed, and anoint your eyes with eye salve, that you may see." And if you remember when we talked about that, the white garments, again, were a symbol of your purity. In other words, be pure so that the nakedness of your sinfulness is not seen, is really the picture that he's trying to get there. So again, back to Revelation, he's just given us this little break from the tribulation. He's encouraging us to be ready. He's encouraging us, don't worry, I'm coming, be ready, right? I mean, that's really the message of that little beatitude break there in verse 15. All right, let's go on to the seventh bowl in verse 17. Let me adjust my screen here a minute so I can find it. By the way, one just little note. In fact, turn back to chapter 6 a minute. It's a verse I may have not made the comment when we were there. I just want to make sure you have this in your head. Back to chapter 6, verse 16. This is during the sixth seal. And it says in verse 16, "And he said to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb." Notice there that it says the wrath of the Lamb, as opposed to the wrath of God. I think we have in our heads that God does all the wrath stuff and Jesus does all the fun stuff, like redeeming us and dying on the cross. But I think that just to get in your heads that the wrath, it's coming from God, but it's also coming from the Lamb, right? This is the wrath of God, the wrath of the Lamb. They are one. Don't just pin it all on God that he's got this wrath problem. But this is the wrath of the heavenly host here that's being played out. All right, so verse 17. Then the seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, "It is done." So here's the seventh angel, right? He's got this bowl of wrath, as the other ones have. And he throws his bowl into the air, which is kind of a funny place to throw the bowl, right? He throws the bowl into the air. But one picture that the commentaries point out, if you remember, just give you the reference back in Ephesians 2:2, Satan is called the prince of the power of the air, right? And there was this idea that Satan and his demons kind of dwelt in the air, and so the idea of him pouring out this wrath upon the air is really pouring it out upon the realm of Satan, if you will, and it's God cleansing the air. And as we'll see in a minute, there's great repercussions upon the earth because of this. In fact, let me just say it here, right? So him pouring out his wrath upon the air, he really changes the atmosphere. And Shannon can give us all the details on this when we need it. But you know, if you a little bit further down, it says that all of a sudden you have 100-pound hailstones that are coming out of the sky. That's not normal, okay? It's not normal for 100-pound hailstones to come out. But he hereby is absolutely altering the earth, altering the heavens, the atmosphere around the earth here by pouring out this bowl into the air. He's adjusting creation, if you will, as we'll see in the rest of the words that are here. He makes this statement at the end of verse 17, "It is done," which reminds us of the you know, "it is finished," right? That Jesus said on the cross. In his case, the redemption was finished, and here God is saying the punishment or the judgment is finished. And just like at Calvary, you know, when he says this is finished, it's quickly followed by earthquakes. We have here when God says it is finished, we see in verse 18 the earthquakes come. So the two are very, very connected. And the other interesting note that I got from the commentaries here that you know, I would not have picked up on myself, but so I just want to share this with you. You remember when going all the way back to Adam and Eve, and when Eve you know, eats the apple and gets in trouble, right? One of the things that God says, well, let's just turn there because some of you won't believe me. Go back to Genesis chapter 3. No, I'm just kidding. Go back to Genesis chapter 3. It's just interesting to see it, I think, sometimes. Like, oh yeah, I remember that now. Genesis chapter 3, verse 17. So 3:17 says, then to Adam he said, this is God speaking, because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten, this is wife's fault, of course, and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat it in the days of your life, both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, and for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. So here you see when man sins, right? Well, the other thing that happens is that the ground is cursed, right? The earth itself is cursed. And that's why we got thorns and thistles, and he has the sweat of his brow and all that, because the ground is cursed. So some of the commentaries prophet that here in here at the seventh bowl, what actually is happening is God, as I said, is cleansing the atmosphere, is cleansing the earth with this seventh bowl, and actually removing the curse. And we'll talk more about this in a couple other verses here, but he's actually removing the curse that is on the earth here in preparation for you know, the next thing that happens. Again, you got the battle, and then you have Christ returning to establish his kingdom on the earth. So here with the seventh bowl, he's actually removing the curse that is on the earth. I do want to show you one other place in Isaiah chapter 11 that's connected to this. Isaiah 11. We'll just start at verse 6. The wrong chapter. No wonder it looks funny. Isaiah 11:6. It says, the wolf shall also dwell with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young ones shall lie down together. The lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play at the cobra's hole, and the weaned child shall put his hand in the viper's den. They shall not hurt nor destroy in my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So this is a picture of some redeemed earth, if you will, right? Where essentially we go back to the Eden state before the sin. Right? Before the sin, this was the state of the animals, right? Where they all lived together in harmony, and there wasn't this predatory situation that we have after the fall. And so the thought process is here again, when this sixth bowl is laid out, that we return the earth back to its Eden state, getting ready for the reign of Christ on the earth. So that's just something. It's just a thought idea to keep in mind as we go through there. Sorry. As we go through the COVID stuff is tough. Actually, I think it's a piece of Raisin Bran stuck in my throat that won't come out. All right. Let's go on to verse 18 then. And there were noises and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such a mighty and great earthquake as has not occurred since men were on the earth. So here we have this earthquake. Again, it says it's the greatest ever, right? It's the biggest earthquake that has ever occurred since men were on the earth. We have seen this whole idea of thunderings and lightnings and earthquakes before. In fact, we've seen them in particular in the setup for the seventh seal, the seventh trumpet, and now the seventh bowl. Let's go back a minute to chapter 8, verse 5. Here we have the seventh bowl, the seventh trumpet. What am I looking at? Oh, the seventh seal. Here we have the seventh seal in chapter 8, verse 5. It says, then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it on the earth. And there were noises, thunderings, lightning, and an earthquake. So you see it there. You see it in chapter 11, verse 19. Here we have the seventh trumpet now. It says, then the temple of God was opened in heaven, and the ark of his covenant was seen in his temple, and there were lightnings and noises and thunderings and earthquake and great hail. So here you have a very similar picture to what we see now going on here in Revelation chapter 16 with the seventh bowl. As we get to this seventh and final judgment, you just hear kind of the presence of God, really, with the noises, the thunderings, the lightnings, and this great earthquake. It really is a picture of God kind of stepping out and giving his final judgment. But you have this massive earthquake. Again, if you take this back to this idea of the earth is being reconfigured, if you will, right? You have this massive earthquake. You have the atmosphere changing, and now you're going to have the earth changing from this earthquake, this worldwide earthquake. By the way, one of the commentaries said, the earth here is going to be, by all the things that we've seen already, the earth is completely disrupted. This earth was not meant to last forever. The earth is going to change and go away and be replaced. And it just points a little bit in the face of the environmentalists who are all about saving the earth. Well, this earth is going to be wiped out, and there's going to be a new earth. So we can't get too upset about what's going on with this earth. I'm not saying throw your trash on the side of the road, but there's a sanity to some of this stuff too. The other thing, just to along the same idea, since Genesis chapter 6, there have been earthquakes throughout history, but there was no earthquakes before Genesis 6. And this what we see is the final earthquake here in Revelation 16:18. this giant, great earthquake that that kind of changes everything. So again, this idea that it may be the reversal of the curse. It changes the the tectonic plates get settled out and fixed because we didn't have that problem before the sin entered the picture. All right, verse 19. Now that great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. Now, the only issue in this verse is the question of what is the great city? Any thoughts on that? What the great city is? Some of you, it may seem obvious. Some of you, it may not.
Would it be Jerusalem?
So one position is that it is Jerusalem. Any other thoughts? Let's look at a couple of verses that give you two different pictures. If you go back to chapter 11, verse 8, it confirms what Shannon has says in 11:8 when we were talking about the 2 witnesses. And it says, their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Okay, and we said at that time, where our Lord was crucified is obviously Jerusalem. So this great city, this place that's called a great city in 11:8 is obviously talking about Jerusalem, but it's also then associated with Sodom and Egypt, again, with evil during that time because Jerusalem had fallen into such a sorry state. But then I want you to look at chapter 14, verse 8. In 14:8, it says, and another angel followed. These were the 3 angels, if you remember. And another angel followed, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So here we have Babylon kind of associated with this great city. So I'm just bringing that up because the commentaries are kind of split on this issue as to whether this is Jerusalem or whether this is Babylon. I kind of think that I lean towards Babylon because it just would be odd for him to be talking because the commentaries that say it's Jerusalem say that this is a very positive thing that happens to Jerusalem, that it is split into 3 pieces, then that there is some kind of fountain that comes out of this fissure of Jerusalem that kind of feeds the valley and all that stuff. It just seems like a stretch to me. Now,
Rich.
it could be, yeah.
Rich. It's just that, I lean towards Jerusalem, which is fine. But also in my scripture, it says it's referred to as fallen is Babylon the Great. It's not like it's referred to in 11:8, where it's very clear description of it being the great city where Jesus was crucified. But anyway, mine just says Babylon the Great.
But what does it say in the first part of verse 19?
Well, I was just reading 14:8, where yours is a little different in wording. Mine just says fallen is Babylon the Great.
I see.
Where 11:8 is more the
Great city.
being very specific, saying the great city, and then they were clear saying that is where the Lord is crucified. So I just lean towards that direction, but
Yeah.
that's it.
Okay. Like I said, the commentaries are split on this.
Yeah.
Feel free to lean in any direction you like.
Yeah.
So regardless of what that first part of verse 19 is, the second part certainly says that the great Babylon was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of his fierceness, of his wrath. So here, the important thing here is this, in the middle of it, that Babylon was remembered before God. In other words, the sin of Babylon was remembered. The sin of that great city was remembered. It wasn't, sometimes we wonder whether God's going to remember the sin that some countries and people have gotten away with. And I think this is one of those encouragements for us that no, God remembers. God's going to remember what Babylon has done. And as a result of that, the cup of God's wrath is going to be poured out on Babylon, and we'll have a lot more to say about that when we get into chapter 17. And then in the second part of the first part of, let's go back, verse 19. Now the great city, regardless of what you believe that is, was divided into three parts, and the cities of the nations fell. Right? Don't miss that part, right? That somehow when this seventh bowl is poured out, that the great cities of the world fall, in addition to Babylon, and you do have this division into three parts of the great city, and if that's Jerusalem, even Jerusalem is divided into three parts during this time. And then let's keep going, right? Verse 20, then every island fled away and the mountains were not found. Now that's a pretty dramatic statement. If you go back to chapter 6 a minute, when we opened the sixth seal, we had a similar statement in 6:14. When the sixth seal was opened.
I'm sorry, I'm still stuck on this Jerusalem and the great city thing. Just real
Okay,
quick. So I mean, this spoke to me. So I don't know if it's correct me, but to me, it's breaking verse 19. It's breaking it up into three sections. It's saying, and the great city was split, and the cities of the nations fell, and Babylon the Great was remembered. So to me, that's three different things. So you do have the great city, and then you have Babylon the Great, and then you also have the nations. So anyway, that's just.
No, I agree with you there, Debbie.
Okay,
all
right, that's it.
No, it's three different things. The only question is, what is the great city? And you know, as I said, the commentaries are split on what the great city is. But yeah, it's three different things: the great city, and then the cities across the world, the nations, and then Babylon. Those three things are
So why would that
devastated in that time. All right, where was I?
Revelation 6:14.
Oh yeah, Revelation 6:14. At the sixth seal, we have this this devastation going on. At 6:14, it says, "Then the sky receded as a scroll when it rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place." So here, you know, during this time, you had some kind of shaking, right? This was again a great earthquake in verse 12 there, but you had the shaking and stars from heaven fell and everything, and you got the mountains and islands moved out of their place. And then when you get now back to chapter 16, verse 20, now you have every island fled away or was removed, and the mountains were not found. So the idea here is that whatever happened at the seal judgment is now much worse here at the bowl judgment, because now we can't find the islands anymore. Now we can't find the mountains anymore. They've been flattened somehow, and the islands have disappeared. Now, whether that's a great flood that has swallowed them up, or they have just been flattened like the mountains have been flattened. Again, this picture of all of creation being reworked, right? All of it being changed, and a renovation, if you were. Later on, we actually see a recreation of the earth, a new earth and a new heaven. But here we're kind of seeing a renovation to bring it back to the state of Eden, going on with this massive seventh bowl. All right. See if I got anything else. Blup, blup, blup. Oh, one of the other commentaries said it may actually be that this is going to stretch your brain a little bit, but if you remember back in Genesis, when the flood came, right? And one of the theories of the flood is that the earth was at one time had a sphere of water in the atmosphere, right? There was some kind of sphere of water surrounding the earth that God released in order to flood the earth kind of instantaneously. which has allowed then, the sun to be more intense, has allowed radiation to come into the earth, such that we don't have people living, for 900 years anymore. They live slightly less than that today. But the thought may be that during this time, that canopy is replaced, that the water then surrounds the earth again. And if you go back to the Old Testament, it talks about in the end times that actually the people will live much longer lives again. So again, returning to that Eden state, returning to that state when the animals are friendly with one another, where people live long lives. It's just an interesting thought process that this 1,000-year reign of Christ that we'll hear much more about, maybe in a very much renovated earth. It's the only best word I can think for it at this time. So, all right, so that's verse 20. Verse 21, then finally we get, and great hail from heaven fell upon men, each hailstone about the weight of a talent. And man blasphemed God because of the plague and the hail, since the plague was exceedingly great. So it says each hailstone was about the weight of a talent. What's a talent?
About 75 pounds or so, maybe somewhere around there.
100 pounds.
So the definition of a talent was the amount of weight that a man could carry, right? How much weight could you actually carry? So now that's very dependent upon the person, right? But typically that's around 100 pounds is what is generally recognized. In fact, some of the translations just translate it to 100 pounds. So if you can't lift 100 pounds and carry it, you need to get yourself in shape. I guess that's the point. But I was trying to think, well, what weighs 100 pounds? What would be a 100-pound hailstone? And when I Googled it online, the first thing that came up was a toilet. Right? So just think of toilets falling from heaven, crashing on people. This could be a devastating situation, right? So I mean, that's the point, right? The 100-pound hailstones crashing down on the earth. And of course, the men finally at this point, they recognize that they need to turn to God, right? And get saved. No, they don't, right? Their response is, man blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail. Their only response here is to lash out against God, even in the last final event here. I mean, this is the last thing that happens. It's interesting to think that if we go back to the sixth bowl, you got the nations all coming together to fight against God. And then here in verse 21, we've got these hailstones coming down, just crushing those armies that are brought together to fight against God. It's kind of softening the battlefield, if you will, before the great battle of Armageddon. So, all right. So as I said, normally we would go right to chapter 19 at this point. In fact, in the middle of chapter 19, but that's not what Scripture does. It gives us a little side trip here in chapters 17 and 18. And the reason is this. And again, we saw this when we look back at verses 5 through 7. There's this little bit of response to someone who might say, wow, you're being pretty tough on these nations. You're being pretty tough on Babylon by crushing them here. Why are you doing that? Shouldn't you be a little nicer, God, during this tribulation time? And so verse 17 and 18 is really a description of Babylon, description of this false world system, so that people can understand why this kind of judgment has to come upon them. And just as a summary, chapter 17 is really focused on the world religious system at this time, kind of led by the false prophet. And then chapter 18 is really the false economic system or world system, political system that's in place. And so we'll look at both of those as we go through. What I thought I'd do, I thought I would have a little bit of time, so this is good. This gives us just about right to give you a little introduction into 17. And so what I want to do is read the first few verses and then talk about something. So let's read chapters. First of all, let me just pause. Anything else on chapter 16? Any other questions? Any other questions I won't answer like Debbie raises? I just ignore and keep going forward.
No, Rich, I was going to say, for all the house flippers out there, the 7th bowl is demo day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Demo and cleanup.
So just from my understanding, we've got these bowls poured out. So now the battle hasn't actually happened yet, correct? This is to happen now after it is done.
That's right. The battle happens in chapter 19.
Yeah, after it is done. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Anything else? All right, let's go to chapter 17 then. Let me just read for you a couple of verses, and then we'll pause on one part of it here. It says, "Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, 'Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication.' So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, and having on her hand a golden cup full of abominations of the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement." I just want to stop there. I actually want to spend a few minutes looking at verse 5 and this name that is given to the harlot, to try to understand who this harlot is, so that we can understand the rest of the stuff around it. So you have this name that is written on the harlot's forehead: Mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Before we get into that, are there any other translations that you all have of that different from those words? Okay, everybody's kind of the same. Good. I thought it was. Yeah.
Mine says the mother of prostitutes and detestable things on the earth.
Okay. Very good. So again, this is the first thing is, it says Mystery, Babylon the Great. I think the point here is to point out that when we talk about Babylon the Great here, it's not actually talking about the city. It's the mystery Babylon the Great. It's the mysterious Babylon. It's the Babylon in mystery form, if you will. It's the Babylon of Satan's deception on the earth. It's the archetype head of the worldly resistance to God is named Babylon here, right? The worldly resistance to God. It's the it's the religious culture of the world that is all worshiping the beast and everything else during this time that's being referred to. Right, then it goes on and says, and the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. So what is being said is that this mystery Babylon the Great is what has spawned all of the harlots and the abominations on the earth. Now, in the scriptures, the word harlot is often used as a symbol for what? Harlotry or prostitution is also often a symbol for what?
Fleshly pleasure?
No, I mean, that's what it is, but it's a symbol for something else.
Unfaithfulness?
In what sense, Jim?
To God. They violated the way that they were supposed to go.
Yeah. So it's unfaithfulness to God, right? It's not just about, men going with prostitutes. When he talks about harlotry, they're primarily talking about their unfaithfulness to God. Let me just show you this in a couple of places. Go back to Jeremiah chapter 3. It talks about them going after other gods, right? It's about them following after other religions. It's about them getting connected to the religions of the places that they went to. Jeremiah chapter 3. Did I say that?
Mhm.
Jeremiah 3, verse 6. So here's just one example, Jeremiah 3:6. The Lord also said to me in the days of Josiah the king, have you seen what that backsliding Israel has done? She has gone up on every high mountain and under every green tree, and there played the harlot. And I said, after she had done these things, return to me. But she did not return, and her treacherous sister Judah saw it. And then I saw that for all the causes that backsliding Israel had committed adultery, I had put her away and given her a certificate of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but went and played the harlot also. So if you remember your history, I got something in my throat that will not go away. If you remember your history, Israel, which was the northern kingdom, was the first one that kind of turned and left God, if you will, and turned to the idols in the land. And then finally, Judah did the same thing. And so that's what is being referred to here, that these people have turned to the idols of the land and have left God. And let me just show you, go over a couple of pages to Ezekiel chapter 16. Ezekiel 16, we'll start at verse 20. Ezekiel 16:20 says, moreover, you took your sons and your daughters, whom you bore to me, and these you sacrificed them to be devoured, were your acts of harlotry a small matter. So here you see the Israelites were actually sacrificing their children to idols, and he's calling them harlots for doing that in verse 20. 21, that you have slain my children and offered them up by causing them to pass through the fire. In all your abominations and acts of harlotry, you did not remember the days of your youth when you were naked and bare and struggling in your blood. In other words, when I took you on. Then it was so all after your wickedness. Woe, 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 woe to you, says the Lord God, that you also built for yourself a shrine, made a high place for yourself in every street, etc., etc. Verse 26, you also committed harlotry with the Egyptians. Verse 28, you also played the harlot with the Assyrians. Verse 30, how degenerate is your heart, says the Lord, seeing you do all these things, the deeds of a brazen harlot. So here when we talk about the great harlot in Revelation chapter 17, he's really talking about this idea of going after other religions, going after false religions, going after idols, right? It's the mother, and he's saying in this statement is Babylon is the mother of all harlots, is the mother of all false religions, is the mother of all idolatry. Now the question is, how did that occur? How did Babylon become the mother of all harlots? What does that statement mean? And you really have to go back to Genesis chapter 11. And this is one of those things where I'm reading the commentaries and I'm going, what is he trying to tell me here? I have no idea. And then all of a sudden the light bulb goes on. So follow with me a few minutes. Genesis chapter 11. This is the story of the Tower of Babel, which we know, but we need to understand in order to understand what we're talking about here in Revelation. So Genesis chapter 11, let me just read the story for you in verse 1. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. So here, this is, by the way, right after Noah. right? Everybody comes together after the flood, and that's where we are in chapter 11. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, come, let us make brick and bake them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and they had asphalt or tar for mortar. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. The Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the whole earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the earth. So you understand the picture, right? They're building this tower. God comes down, sees it, decides to do something about it. He confuses their languages. So all of a sudden, the people have different languages. And because they have different languages, they kind of sort together by language groups, and they go out across the earth they're scattered by language groups and across the earth. Now, the question is, why was God upset? Why did God do this to them? Why did God scatter them? Why did God confuse their languages? Why?
I think the tower was all about them. It was uplifting themselves, not uplifting God. And so they separated themselves from God.
Yeah, so there's two main things. The first big one, as Nana said, is that was all about them, right? It was all about making a name for ourselves, right? It was all about focusing on them. It was all about setting up worship of themselves, right? Worship of man's accomplishments. So that's the first thing. Anybody else have anything else? Any other reason why God may have done this? Let me get you to turn back in Genesis chapter 9. After Noah is delivered, in chapter 9, verse 1, it says, so God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. God gives Noah and his sons direction to fill the earth. Here we have by the way, we're at Noah's grandson here that's actually leading this effort. You go back to chapter 10 to figure that out. But his grandsons, it's only 2 generations away from Noah. You have these folks who are building this tower, building this great city. And look at in verse 4, we're going to make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. What God wanted was to scatter them across the face of the earth, right? That's what he instructed them to do back in chapter 9, verse 1. They decide, no, we don't want to do this. We all want to stay here together. We're going to build this tower. We're going to worship ourselves. And therefore, we don't have to be scattered. And then if you go down to verse 9, right, God confuses their language, and therefore the Lord scattered them abroad across the face of all the earth. That was his plan, was to scatter them from the beginning. But they didn't want to do that. So the two things that they did was, one, they disobeyed God, right? God instructed them to do something, and they disobeyed him in not doing that, which was to be scattered and to fill the whole earth. And then the second thing, as Dana said, was that they focused on themselves, right? They were trying to worship their own doing, worship this great tower or ziggurat, whatever it was that they built for themselves. Now, what does that have to do with Babylon, the mother of all harlots? The connection here is this. We have here a group of people that have decided to build this tower to worship themselves. In fact, to institute a new religion, right? A false religion that's focused on themselves, that's focused on disobedience to God. God then scatters them across the earth. What do? They bring those false ideas with them, right? They bring those false religions, the idea about worshiping themselves, the idea about being disobedient to God with them. So, and essentially what happens is that Babel or Babylon becomes the mother of all false thinking, of all false religions, right? So that's the point back then to Revelations when it says that Babylon is the mother of harlots and of the abominations. It begins all the way back there at Babel with the thinking that those people had around worshiping themselves and being disobedient to God. Now you've got this. This is why Babylon is being judged so harshly. She is actually the beginning of all that thinking, all that selfish thinking that people have. And it is the, so what is the, let me ask this, what is the false religion of today? What's today's false religion? It's a broad question.
Love yourself. Love yourself. It's all about me, the me generation.
Right?
Secular humanism.
Yeah. It's all about tolerance, right? It's all about personal truth, personal experience. It's all about worship of the earth, right? And all these things are kind of wrapped in here together. And you can see there that Babylon here is the mother of all that, is what is really what's being said. The mother of all that false thinking really comes down to worshiping self and disobedience to God, which really started right here in the third generation after Noah, and as it was spread across the whole earth as a result of what happened there at Babel. So anyway, that is what I wanted to give you kind of as an introduction to chapter 17. We'll go into the details beginning at verse 1 next time. But that's the background for what's going on in verse 17. In chapter 17 and chapter 18 as we get into it. All right, any thoughts or comments before we wrap here and turn to Hugh? By the way, Walter, Susie, it's good to see you on video. Thank you for getting that fixed. All right, Hugh, to you, sir. Can you close us in a word of prayer?
And sure, let's pray. Lord, I just pray to you at this time. I thank you for the words you've given Brother Rich to pass on to us, Lord, about the end times, Lord. And I just pray that